If you have been struggling with your Bible study, you're struggling to stay consistent, or maybe you just don't know what to read, well, I have the best Bible study tip that I've ever received that will help you with your Bible study today. And that tip is this: study what applies to your life, what you're going through right now. After all, if you're reading about a story and you can relate to the person in the story, or you're reading about something in maybe one of the historical texts like Psalms, and David is crying out for help and he needs deliverance from enemies, and that is something that you're going through, then that is going to be the best place to start with your Bible study. Something that is relatable, something that you are going through and you can resonate with the text. And that is also what we are going to do today. In fact, today we are going to walk through together in a very simple, easy method, the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 2. Why? Because it's something that we are experiencing, we're all experiencing in the world that we live in today. And we're going to look at how that passage is relevant to today's life. We can all relate to it, and it'll give you a good example of maybe a place where you might want to start with your Bible study. So let's dive in. Okay, so when we left off with Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and if you haven't seen that video, you can go back and take a look at that one. We were talking about Solomon, the wisest man to ever live. He was king and he was David's son, and he was wrestling with this question of the meaning of life. What does it all mean? Because he was looking at life, as he termed it, under the sun, meaning that he was just looking at the here and now. He was not considering anything after this earthly life. So he wasn't looking at any of his actions in light of eternity. Now, he did believe in God. It was obvious that he did believe in God from chapter 1, but he didn't believe that God had anything to do with whatever happened after this world and this life. It was, God was there, but he had nothing to do with eternity. So he comes away with the concept that I'm going to pursue the meaning of life through wisdom, regular, everyday, practical wisdom. And he was the wisest man to ever live. So he was very smart, very intelligent, but he comes away with this idea that life is meaningless because he was looking for wisdom as it could be understood apart from eternity. Again, that phrase, under the sun. And you'll see that I'm going to refer down to my notes because I don't want to miss anything. When it comes to Bible study, there are so many layers that I want to be careful I don't miss anything. So if you see me look down, that's why. But he found no meaning in even just skillful or wise living when it is considered apart from eternity. So he is saying to himself, I am a smart man. I am a very wealthy man. And even though with my wisdom, I can build things, I can build vineyards, I can build palaces, and I can build cities, and I can have anything that I want. I've got the resources to have anything I want. If this is all there is to life, and there's nothing beyond this, then it's all meaningless. So he comes away with the whole idea that just through him applying his everyday practical wisdom, he found no meaning in life, in toiling and working hard and grinding, if it was just all going to waste away. He can't take any of it with him, and there's nothing beyond this world. Then what is it all for? That's the sentiment that he had in chapter 1. So now we're going to see in chapter 2 that he's still wrestling with this question of the meaning of life, which is something that people still wrestle with today. Does my life have meaning? Does it have purpose? What is my purpose? What is my calling? Why am I here? What is it that God has placed me on this planet to do? Those are questions that people are still wrestling with today. The very same things that Solomon was wrestling with. So we see in chapter 2 now, he is going to switch over and he's going to see if he can find the meaning of life through pleasure. And chapter 2 reads, "And I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and princes or provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and in my wisdom never failed me. My wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. So I decided to compare wisdom with foolishness and madness. For who can do this better than I, the king? I thought wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. For the wise can see where they are going, but fools walk in the dark. Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, since I will end up in the same way as the fool, what's the value of all my wisdom? This is all so meaningless, for the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. In the days to come, both will be forgotten. So I came to hate life, because everything done here under the sun is so troubling. Everything is meaningless, like chasing the wind. Okay, so let's begin to break this passage down. Always, I first take a look at, the who, what, when, and those types of questions. So let's just revisit this as we did in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. But the author is King Solomon. The audience is everyone. It was written for the body at large, the ecclesia. The setting is the final years of Solomon's reign. So he's really reflecting and looking back over his life. And the purpose is to demonstrate that apart from an eternal component and viewpoint, all that we do in life is meaningless. That is not what we will not have fulfillment and feel purpose if we do not consider our lives and our actions in our lives in light of eternity. Okay, so let's then take a look at verses 1 through 3. He's going to talk about the futility or the foolishness of pleasure. We see here that in chapter 1, he tried to find the meaning of life through everyday wisdom to work hard and build things and organize cities and people, and he still did not find any meaning and purpose in that work and just looking at life through everyday common day wisdom. So now he switches gears and he says maybe the meaning of life can be found through pleasure. So he then starts to seek meaning in laughter and in wine and in entertainment. And he says that he can have anything that his heart desires. He just begins to pursue any type of pleasure that he wants, he goes after. And he thinks that maybe through just living it up, living in the moment, and just giving in to every whim and fancy and fantasy, that is what is going to help him find meaning in life. And so he tests the theory that many people live under today. And it's just this idea that the meaning of life can be found in various pleasures and entertainments and excitements. And we see that in our modern day Hollywood, celebrity and industries, the music industry. You see it in sports with the pro ballers and sports figures. They run from party to party and entertainment to entertainment, looking for fame and importance and that feeling of fulfillment and like they matter and their life matters. And we see all of the time that these same people that chase meaning in all of these frivolities and all of this foolishness, they are some of the people that suffer with depression and take their life even. And they've got all the money in the world and they go on all the trips and they've got the yachts and all of the material things. And they can just take vacations whenever they want. Well, this is what King Solomon did. He had riches beyond measure. So when he says that he went after any pleasure that he wanted, he did. He had the resources. All of the concubines he wanted, he had. And it's some crazy number. I don't remember exactly. I think it's like 800. If you remember or you know the number of concubines that Solomon had, go ahead and put it down in the comments for me, because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was around 800, or it might have been more than that. But the point is that he sought meaning in pleasure. And then he also sought meaning of life, as we see further in verses 4 through 11, in great accomplishments. But he goes on to the great accomplishments in verses 4 through 11, because in verses 1 through 3, with all the partying and the entertainment and living it up, he does conclude that it's all meaningless. He still comes to the same conclusion that he came to trying to find the meaning of life and wisdom. That it was all the partying and all the laughter and all the frivolities. It was all meaningless, like chasing the wind. He concludes that those pursuits ultimately did not give him a sense of purpose, did not fulfill that hole in his soul where he needed to have his life matter. So he moves on to the third thing, which is trying to find the meaning of life now in great accomplishments. So in 4 through 11, we see that he's building great projects. He's building houses. He's planting vineyards, and he's creating gardens and amassing all of this wealth and all of these possessions. He says that he's got water going down to all the various fruit trees and everything that he has in these fabulous gardens. But despite achieving those things, he finds, once again, there's no lasting fulfillment. Because keep in mind, all of this that he is doing, he's doing it through the lens of living life under the sun. And in an under the sun world, there's no eternity. There's no afterlife, meaning heaven or hell. There's nothing beyond when you die. That's it. And all that you worked for, it's just for nothing. And he's actually going to talk a little bit more about what would happen to all of the things that he's built and he's created. So we'll get to that. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but he achieves all of these things. He builds all of these grand projects, and he works really hard to accomplish a lot in terms of structures, and he still finds no lasting fulfillment. He still finds that through all of this building and organizing and leading men and teams of people to accomplish these great tasks, he becomes famous. It says in verse 9, he becomes famous, and still fame alone did not give him meaning. He still felt that void. So if building and improving and amassing all of these great riches and accomplishments could give true meaning in life, then Solomon, as he calls himself the teacher, he would certainly have found it because of all of these wonderful accomplishments that he managed to attain. But again, he says, it means nothing because I can't take it with me. When I leave here, these buildings, these structures, they'll decay. The vineyards will become overgrown. And then what is it all for? So he then now really sinks into this idea of, I'm going to pass away someday. And even with all of my wisdom, I'm going to die just like the foolish man. Let's look at what he says in verses 12 through 16, where he gets to this reality that there's death for the wise and the wealthy and those who've indulged in pleasure, just like there's going to be death for those people who've had none of that. And so he compares his wisdom to folly or foolishness. He acknowledges that, yes, wisdom is better than foolishness because it does provide guidance. And he says that in verse 12, but yet he still says, but in the end, yes, it does provide me with guidance, and being wise does give me that sort of an upper hand. But in the end, I'm going to die just like the foolish man. I'm going to share that same fate. We all are going to share that same fate, which then means all of my wisdom that allowed me to do all these accomplishments, it meant nothing. So in an under the sun world, death makes all of life's accomplishments meaningless. So he still is struggling to find, where do I find the meaning in all that I'm doing and all that I've accomplished, and now that I'm in my later years of life. So we go on to verses 17 through 23, and he talks about the burden of work, and he despairs over all this hard work he's done, knowing that his achievements are going to be left to somebody else. He's going to die, and everything that he's built up and all the fortunes he's amassed, they're going to be left to somebody who didn't work for them. And that idea really bothers him. He says that they're going to be left eventually to someone else who may or may not even value them. All of his accomplishments, everything he's built, all the wealth he's attained, it could be left to a foolish person who's going to run through it. It could be left to a person who doesn't value the vineyards or the gardens that he's created. And so this idea that I did all of this, and if there's nothing after this life, I die, somebody who didn't work for any of this is going to receive it. They may or may not value it. They may or may not squander it. And the idea of that really bothers him. And this highlights this frustration that he has in striving for things that do not endure. And that's what he's done his whole life. He's always strived to accomplish more and do more and grind more and amass more. And so he says that, well, there's another possible solution, and that is that my wealth and everything that I've built could be left to my heir. And that heir could be a fool. And actually, it turns out that with all of the concubines that Solomon had, he had all of these daughters and only one son, Rehoboam. And he actually did turn out to be a fool. So it's really ironic how Solomon is contemplating that everything that I've built up could just be left to my heir. But what if my heir is no good? And so I did a little extra work and I read up about Rehoboam in my Bible dictionary. And I talked about just the basics that you need for Bible study. And I think the title was like, it's Bible studies no longer frustrating. Take a look at that video if you want to see the resources that I use. They're very minimal, usually just the Bible and a notebook. But if you wanted to get one more resource, I did recommend this Bible dictionary by Tyndale. And I went ahead and I looked up Rehoboam because the Bible dictionary is excellent when you want to look up places and people and get more information. But I found it fascinating that when I looked up Rehoboam, it said that soon Rehoboam forsook the law of the Lord and all Israel followed him. So he was nothing like his grandfather David, who was after God's own heart. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, a preoccupied father who himself grew increasingly lax about spiritual things. Rehoboam's mother was Naamah, a pagan Ammonite princess who presumably lacked any spiritual perception. So he had a preoccupied father and a mother who was a pagan, so did not believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so his father's example of keeping a harem and having numerous children likewise had an impact on him. Rehoboam had 18 wives, 16 concubines, 28 sons, and 60 daughters. He spent a considerable amount of time providing living arrangements for all of those kids and all of his concubines and everything. And at length, because of Rehoboam, the apostasy of Judah became so great that God brought judgment on the nation in the form of a foreign invasion. So now Solomon's son, because of his foolish behavior, now Judah gets invaded. So what do you think happens to all of those beautiful structures that his father built? So just very, very telling. And you see the foreshadowing here of what's to come as Solomon is considering all that I've worked for, and it could be left to someone who doesn't value it, won't take care of it, and didn't do anything to earn it or work for it. So that is what he's struggling with in verses 17 to 23. And he realizes that death ends this life for both the wise and the foolish, and the thought that life has no ultimate meaning because we are created for eternity. In fact, we're going to see later, I believe it's in chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes, it actually says in the Bible that God placed eternity in our heart. He put in us this need for something beyond this world. So we then end up in verses 24 through 26, where here Solomon does give, he has a glimpse of hope. Just for a moment, he comes out of this toiling of his mind and he has a glimpse of hope when he realizes that he has to enjoy life as a gift from God. So let's take a look at what he says. So the chapter concludes with a key insight that Solomon has. He says that while all of his human efforts were meaningless, them by themselves are meaningless, all of his building and amassing, but he can find joy in work and life if he recognizes that joy came from God, that ability to build and that ability to be wise and that ability to lead people and that ability to create all came from God. If he looks at it that way, then he can find some joy. So he comes away with this thought that true satisfaction comes from trusting in God's provision rather than just human striving. God is providing you a way to create. God is giving you that drive to go and build. And God is giving you dreams of, building vineyards and new ways of doing things. And so when he looks at all that he's done and says, God has allowed this, God has provided me with the resources to do this, then he begins to find joy. And so he's talking about how to live life under the sun, where he acknowledges that that God is there, but he's still not connecting God to what happens after this life. And so he's almost saying that I'm just going to make the best of a bad situation. This thing is hopeless, it's meaningless, it's all for nothing. So I'm just going to decide that I know that the ability to even do any of this has come from God. So I will take joy in at least that. So it's almost like a fatalistic kind of point of view. He's almost saying, I'm just going to make the best of a bad situation. Everything is meaningless. It's all for nothing. But the least I can do is say, well, you know what? At least I can take some joy in that God gave me the ability to do these things. So he's still not quite all the way there because, yes, he believes in God. He believes that God has allowed him to do these things, but he's still not connecting it to these things can have an eternal impact. Okay, so he's just making the best of a bad situation. So he mentions God, but it's not in the sense of an eternal God. So overall, we come to the end of chapter 2, and it emphasizes still the futility of chasing worldly pleasure, chasing worldly accomplishments and achievements. And it does hint at the end at the importance of a God-centered perspective to life. And so we see just a little glimpse of his mind kind of turning in the right direction, but he's not all the way there. And isn't that so much like people today? We get caught up in the doing more, the going harder, the amassing more. And sometimes we lose sight of why we do what we do. And if we don't consider it in light of the impact that it can carry beyond when we leave, then it isn't fulfilling as it should be. It isn't as fulfilling as it should be. So we will see how Solomon continues to wrestle with this question in chapter 3. But if you want to go back and get caught up, you can take a look at chapter 1 we covered in this video right here, and I'll see you there.